history and context of the resistance movement in Sacramento. The shift to the 20th century saw a massive boom in agricultural industry in Sacramento. With the massive rise in the industry, the need for workers was very prevalent. The main people who worked on these farms were Dust Bowl migrants, Japanese and Chinese workers, and Mexican laborers. These workers were exploited by low wages, harsh conditions, lack of rights, and company housing that was overcrowded and unsanitary. And the owners of these industries would pin the groups of workers against each other. One of the biggest pushbacks against this agricultural industry at the time was the Wheatland Hop Riot, where 4 deaths occurred when a protest against the inhumane working conditions ended with 4 deaths. This is the leader right here, or one of the main people in the movement from the 1950s and 1970s. The time from 1950 to 1970 in Sacramento was a time of significant social and political change caused by resistance movements in the city driven by civil rights, racial justice, labor rights, and cultural equity. But one of the biggest movements at this time in the city was the Chicano movement. The Chicano movement was caused by decades of economic and racial injustice towards Mexican Americans. The movement was driven by farm work, struggles, student activism, cultural pride in the city of Sacramento. The movement's legacy endures in Sacramento today, reflected in its vibrant Chicano culture, political representation, and ongoing advocacy for social justice. From the 1980s to the 1990s, Sacramento became a hub for resistance movements, as diverse communities came together to address critical issues such as racial inequality, economic injustice, LGBTQ+ rights, and environmental concerns. From the 2000s to present, the main movement I decided to focus on was the BLM movements in Sacramento, with one very important tragic death that's kind of a part of the movement being Stephon Clark, which happened in Sacramento. He's one of the most famous figures of the BLM resistance movements because his death was caused by a police officer in the Sacramento PD. He got murdered for having a phone in his hand in his own grandmother's backyard. And the causes of this really put a force on the government to calling for police accountability and systematic reform. And this is just a video of the visuals and the protests and such. Then this kind of ties into the BLM movement in Sacramento. BLM Sacramento has been a force in the city's fight against police brutality, racial injustice, and systematic racism. As part of the broader Black Lives Movement, which began in 2013 following the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer, BLM Sacramento emerged as a grassroots, activist-led chapter dedicated to challenging institutional discrimination and advocating for the Black community. In summary, Sacramento has a long history of activism and resistance, from early fights for labor rights and racial justice to recent movements like Black Lives Matter and immigrant rights. The city has always been a place where people stand up for what is right. These movements show how powerful activism can be in creating change and giving a voice to those who need it most. Sacramento's history of resistance continues to shape the city and push for a more just future. And these are my links. Thank you for listening.